All right, Athena, come on. Come on. Okay. Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Welcome to the Paint Branch Faith Development program. You were in the right place if you were here to learn about mysticism. So, mysticism in modern times, historic and urban practices. And we have instructors Eldritch and Renée Katz. And we will be reviewing and having an overview of the mystical tradition of the world's major religions, starting with a working description of mysticism. We're going to review some tools and universal symbols as taught in a modern inclusive tradition of Wicca. And this connects to the UU source number 1, a direct experience of the transcending mystery, as well as UU source 6, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions. And as I mentioned, this is Paint Branch Unitarian Universalist Church. We have services at 10 a.m. every Sunday. We would love for you to join us. You can find the link to our services on Facebook. Also, you can email me, and everyone who's here should have my email. And I am happy to send you a link. We would love for you to visit us at Paint Branch. And may you join me in lighting our chalice. We light this chalice to hold sacred our direct experience of the ultimate reality and union with the absolute, the infinite, or God. And now I pass the torch to our instructors for the evening, Eldritch and Renée Katz. Please do introduce yourselves. And we appreciate your time and sharing your wisdom with us about mysticism.
Well, I'm very glad to be here. My name is Eldritch, and I live in College Park, Maryland, the ancestral and current home of the Piscataway, the Anacostia, and the Pamunkey. I use he, him pronouns, and I am very glad to talk about this topic. I rarely talk in depth about Stone Circle Wicca, and I won't do that tonight, but I will talk about some tools and about some practices that are deceptively simple. Sometimes we take our spirituality for granted, and oftentimes we find spirituality in the simple moments, the simple, tangible things around us. And so I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you tonight. Renée?
Hi, everybody. I'm Renée Katz. I'm a member at Paint Branch. I joined with my husband in 2006, and we have 2 daughters there. I'm getting most of what I'm sharing tonight from a graduate class from American University with Gershon Greenberg, Professor Greenberg there. And it really stuck with me since taking the class. So I think when something came up with Eldritch about mysticism, I said, oh, I had such an interesting experience taking this class all about it and glad to share some of what I learned in the class, and touching on a few examples from different world religions. I especially found this working definition interesting and the ways it can apply to so many different practices.
Renée, I'm really glad we had that encounter I think it was at the coffee chat after service, and
I think so.
You know, good things happen when we connect, and I really like that. I should also say that I'm a member of Paint Branch for going on 3 years now. I've known Paint Branch for almost 3 decades, and I really have enjoyed knowing the community. And then I realized I only live a few miles away from there. Why don't I consider membership there? My spiritual practices in general, I won't go in depth about this tonight, but there's a group called the Radical Fairies, and they were a group that is gay and queer spirituality, people of all genders. And so that's part of what I bring to tonight. I'm also a priestex. We use the term priestex for then priest or priestess in Stone Circle Wicca. And I'm ordained as a pagan clergy with Circle Sanctuary that's based near Madison, Wisconsin. And I'm always up for talking about how religions can bring us together rather than split us apart. And that's, I think I've been a UU for a very long time in that regard. And so as Renee and I were talking, Renee's like, I took this class in mysticism and it was like really cool. And I still have this stuff. And I'm like, if you have stuff and you have a topic, let's talk tonight.
Yeah. Well, I can start I'm going to share my screen. So prepare to have your screen shared. Okay. So we went through this with what our goals are with the class, and won't be going too into depth with any of they'll be more looking at like moments from different religions and spiritual practices. The most in-depth thing I linked in the bibliography is a paper that I did on Vedic mantra and mysticism. So that one has a sort of case study thing happening. That's on the last slide that you can see if you'd like to. So we're going to skip past this, Eldritch?
Yes.
Okay. So the working definition that we based this class on that I took was about mystical experiences being direct experiences of ultimate reality or knowledge of yourself in the divine reality, put a few different ways. But the oneness of the ultimate reality and the self is the key concept there. And this was taken from William James's 2 chapters in his Gifford lectures, which are lectures that started in the 1880s and have been going on since then till present day, with an exception of a few years in World War II. And they're on natural theology, and you can actually access most of it online. giffordlectures.org, I think, is the website, but they try to make it publicly available, and people will do lectures for about 2 years, and then they'll publish them in books. And more recently, people like Carl Sagan's done it, and some former prime minister. But besides theologists, there'll be philosophers, writers, scientists, all on topics of natural theology. So that's and this was in 1902 that he gave this lecture. So since then, it's kind of been a working definition that people have responded to, built off of, critiqued, and so on. So with that definition of that experience being mystical, he asserted that you can tell something's a mystical experience with these 4 characteristics, or that he's observed across cultures these 4 characteristics in mystical experiences. And the first 2 were kind of the necessary ones, and saying, but then the second 2 are also common in most of them as well. So you can have it with the first 2, and then the second 2 are kind of building off that. Ineffability. So it's always fun talking about things you can't describe or put into words. So that's always like a paradoxical thing about trying to define something like this, but the not really being able to adequately explain this experience in our human ways of speaking. And I put some quotes from the Gifford lectures in here just to see sort of how he goes. Oh, I skipped and I don't know how to go back. But he goes into more detail about.
You can try your arrow button.
Okay, let me see. Yes, okay. Just goes into detail about what he means by ineffable in this context. And I like the comparison to love, and not really how you could explain that to a person that hasn't had that experience, or explaining what you're feeling exactly right. And it's an experience that can be felt. And that sometimes trying to express it can be so inadequate it may even not even sound absurd to someone that's not had that experience. The second quality is that these experiences are noetic, so you get some kind of knowledge from them. And this next page has it more in that knowledge is gained from them, but not necessarily instantaneously in that moment. He goes on to say in the lectures that it could be upon reflection later that the knowledge is gained, but even though their experiences and not, researching something to gain the knowledge, but having this direct experience, you're still gaining knowledge in them from that experience, some kind of knowledge about truth that the universe has to offer. And then, so then he says these next two are also common in almost all that he, is saying mystical experiences. So transiency, just that it happens and then it's over. It's like, I think he even gave some time limits in here, which I don't know, this isn't, that it's a limited thing and then it happens, but the kind of, you'll know when it happens again type of thing, from one occurrence to another. And also there could be some arc of development in understanding after having repeated mystical experiences. And then passivity, which is that it's a passive experience, even though you can initiate it yourself by doing some kind of activity that may lead you to having a mystical experience, that once it takes hold, it's really something outside of yourself that takes a hold of you in this moment. Feels like your will is in abeyance, and indeed some other power has grasped you. So with this definition in mind, in the class, we talked about different traditions and how those cultures and traditions, you could interpret the mystical experiences within certain parts of them. And so Eldritch was good to point out, to remind me to say, with talking about examples from different religions or traditions, I'm not a practitioner of any of these, and I'm speaking from an academic perspective of having, read about it. And so if these are interesting, definitely seek out firsthand sources from those that practice them. But in general, that there were some characteristics of American Indian mysticism that did overarch many traditions. In one key thing of the land being holy, a holy, vital, intelligent, and mystically powerful, and infused with supernatural vitality. It's examples of like meteorological phenomenon, like wind, rain, and clouds, the creatures on the earth, the sky, sun, earth, all holy and varying constellations, that these things were common among different tribes and types of mystical experiences, or practiced by seekers and holy people, and to some extent that in many of the cultures, everyone is one or the other, a seeker or a holy person. Some of these disciplines are vision seeking, dreaming, dancing, singing, making offerings. And so one myth of the peace pipe, which I linked at the bibliography, a more detailed story of it, but that there were the two hunters and they viewed a white buffalo calf and that turned into a woman. And the first hunter, went with bad intentions and tried to, harm her, and he was turned to bones. And the second one followed her instructions for preparing for her to visit their town, and went and prepared for her arrival. And then when she did arrive, she gifted the peace pipe, and with the wood symbolizing things growing in the earth, and there's feathers symbolizing the air, things in the air. The people that smoke it are actually sending their words to the divine spirit and having a connection in that experience. So with Hindu mysticism, the paper that I did, it focused on the practice of mantra in mantra recitation of from the Vedas. And this was the idea that, like, those mantras, especially the Rig Veda, is one of the more poetic ones that gets focused on a lot with this mystical connection. That they're thought to be like recordings of the divine, actual, the sound of. So one of the many ways that people use sound, or whether it be music or other kinds of sound, to feel at one, or to gain that oneness with the ultimate reality. And I found that very interesting. And that's one of the oldest, I think thought to be the oldest oral tradition that's been carried on from the beginning until now. That's people still recite these exact same mantras from the Vedas. And like another example from Islam is in Sufism. If you've heard of whirling dervishes, this is a physical dance experience where people reach a mystical state. And so pretty much every religion, most religions or spiritual practices, you can find maybe something, especially in there may be a specific sect or a specific branch of it that's more tends towards mystical practices than others. And like in Judaism, Kabbalah has a lot of mystical aspects to it. But you could really look at any and find, or most, and find these mystical practices in one way or another. So I think that.
Okay. Let's go back.
Do we want to pause for questions?
Yeah, let's go back one slide and pause. I'm going to put a question in the chat here. Have you had mystical experiences, states of insight into depths of truth? As Renee was going through her notes, I love that phrase, where you find states of insight into depths of truth. Sometimes it's a truth about yourself, sometimes it's a truth about someone else, or it could be a situation. What are your thoughts on mysticism and your experience? If you don't mind, could we take a moment to introduce yourself and say what thoughts are coming to mind and heart?
Mm-hmm. I didn't see anyone else answer in the chat.
Oh, sure. Mm-hmm.
Oh, but I see that Trisha is obeying the rules and has her hand up. So I think you should talk to her first.
I didn't state any rules. So,
I'm going to answer your question with a question. Is
Sure.
Having an out-of-body experience, does that count as a mystical experience?
I would think so. You were transported.
I mean, it's not necessarily a knowledge base, I don't think. I mean, I don't think I gained any knowledge, but it was brief. It was a transient experience. Let's see, what were the other characteristics? Mm-hmm. It kind of defies description. Noetic, what does noetic mean again?
That you gain some kind of knowledge from it. So I don't know, I could be.
I don't know. See, that's the part I'm not sure about, but
Yeah.
it was definitely, I mean, I was meditating, but all of a sudden it was like I was definitely leaving my body, and I was soaring up above myself, and that's a little scary. It was unexpected, and it was passive in that I was not directing it. I didn't want necessarily to leave my body. It just sort of happened.
What about even the knowledge that something like that's possible, or that that's an experience that's capable, you know, people are
Yeah.
capable of having,
And retelling it, you're able to retell it. So I think you've answered your own question to the question that you gained a new insight that this could even happen.
Yeah, it's a little scary though, I have to admit.
Yeah.
And unanticipated and a little scary.
Not good to do while driving.
One can't meditate while driving either. Those are the rules.
I have a story of friends of mine who, remember when you used to put CDs in the visor of your car? They borrowed my car for a trip, and they were looking for music, some jams, and all I had was shamanic kind of meditative music, and that is my way of driving, is getting into a zone and zoning through. Let's see, who else here? Penny, let's go ahead with you, and then Ebony, did you have your, I'm not able to see hands raised, so.
I saw Snow Dancer respond in the chat,
Okay.
but not sure if you.
Okay, well, let's go Penny, then Ebony, then Snow Dancer.
Yeah, a mystical experience I had was when I was 7 years old, and I was baptized with a full dunking of the body. And when that happened, everything turned into just radiant light, and I was filled with incredible joy. And my intention for being baptized was to just show God how much I loved them. And I felt like I got a response.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Is it something, Penny, that you feel that you can replicate, or does it just happen?
I doubt that I could replicate that. I don't think, yeah, I don't think so.
Those kind of pinnacle experiences in your life. All right, Ebony?
Yeah, when I was pregnant with my first child, about maybe like 3 weeks before I gave birth, I was just nesting, getting a little stuff together. My mind wasn't thinking anything. I was just nesting, like just physically getting stuff, kind of just going on autopilot, just nesting, which is what women do when they're about to give birth. Might have been 2 weeks before. Something just came over me that was very warm and fuzzy, and that just let me know that that I can do this, and I don't need any interventions, that I'm a part of community of women who've been giving birth since the beginning of time, and I can do it too, just like they did. And I went to a birthing center and gave birth without any anesthesia, medical intervention, anything. I had a doula. I was so comfortable. Like I went in, like my anxiety, nothing, it was gone. I just knew and felt that I could do this and I wasn't by myself. And it was the most natural thing as breathing. And there was no worries at all, and had a, healthy experience. And it carried on with my second child. I didn't have the same acute experience, but the truth that I learned from that first experience was so heavy, I kept it with my second child. Like when it was time, like I had the same comfort, and it just came. Yeah, but I needed it. It came and I needed it, and it got me through.
Wow, thank you for sharing that experience. There's some kind of assurance and confidence that comes that you can be going through something or preparing to go through something, and that you have an assurance that things are going to be okay. Let's turn to Snow Dancer.
Okay, I've I've been coming up with a whole bunch of things. I'll just mention a few. Um, Way back when I was just entering Christian ministry, um, and I was mainly in Methodist churches and Lutheran church backgrounds, and I went to Los Angeles and I attended this service where there was speaking in tongues, and I never experienced that before because you don't speak in tongues in the Methodist church or the Lutheran church or the Episcopal church. And someone spoke in tongues that evening. It was the first time I'd ever experienced it, and I understood what that person said. Now, that's crazy, but I understood what that person said. And then they asked for an interpretation, and I didn't know that, you know, if you understood what the person was saying, that you would give the message. Well, I shut my mouth because I was too afraid to say anything. But I always remember that I understood that, even though I knew nothing about it. So that was sort of a mystical experience within Christianity.
Hmm.
I used to have a guardian angel who would come to me in dreams, and she was a radical lesbian feminist uh, guardian angel, and she was a person of color. Now, she would never bring me the message in the dream, but she was present in the dream, and I knew that she was there. And I soon learned that in that dream, there would be a message for me. She would be present, I would hear the message, and then the dream would be over. Now, I've only had that experience 3 times, but that's pretty mystical. She hasn't come to me lately, so I guess there's no big life lessons that I need to know. So that's just a couple of things that are sort of mystical experience. I'm sure I could come up with a lot more.
Ebony, if you're able to see either the screen, is there anybody else that has their hand raised or would like to speak?
Nope, no more hands up. Let's take a peek at the chat. Yep, looks like you covered everyone. Thanks for checking.
Great, great. Well, let's go on to the next part of this class. My goal is to download some information, just like Renee has, and then we'll talk a little bit together. I found this, and this has meant so much to me over the years, that across all religions, we are much more similar than we are different. And this book is called Anatomy of the Spirit. It's written by a medical intuitive, Carolyn Mace, PhD. She is quite a prolific course teacher, retreat leader, and talks about just settling into your soul and being led by divine presence. And I love this chart. Don't worry about trying to understand it in depth. I'm not going to present it in that way. But most of us are familiar with the chakra system of the different levels in your body and the different sources of energy and the different related paradigms with each of those levels. And I thought it was very interesting that she equates that there's a chakra itself, a power principle, a sacred truth, and I'm reading across the top, a chakra principle, a power principle, a sacred truth. In Christianity, they call it a sacrament, and in the Kabbalah from the Jewish tree of life, you can see another way of relating to those centers. And across all of these basic religions, or these spiritual structures, if you will, being a spirit inside of a human body, that this is the way knowledge and energy is organized. And as I started dedicating myself to interfaith work, this really helped me focus on that we are all much more similar than we are different. Let's go to the next slide. This talks about Stone Circle Wicca, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I want to remind you that the second part of this class, we talked about the simple moments of life, having some of the most amazing experiences. And we've shared some of those here tonight, talking about a simple experience that was profound, amazing in some way. And people have often found intellectual and rational knowledge through spiritual and contemplative and mystical practices. One thing that is different about Wicca and many other religions is not being a people of the book, not going to something written down, given from on high, but that each person, each individual is sacred and holy, and embodied within them and in their spirit, there is knowledge and truth. I wonder if some of you know a little bit of sign language. Do you know the word know, K-N-O-W? You put your head up, your hand like this to your head. That's knowledge. But there's also, if you take the same hand shape and imagine you put it down at your gut, and that there's knowledge in the head and there's intuitive knowledge below. And so people will say, I had a feeling or a gut instinct. There's a way of knowing. And sometimes you just know. I've heard in the African American community, people saying the phrase, when you know that you know that you know that you know. And I think it's very important to realize, where does knowledge come from? And that's the basis of this class tonight, to talk about where is the source of knowledge. Do you have to go to a source outside of yourself and bring it into yourself? Or do you have an altar inside of yourself where you find truth and you get it revealed within you? I see that as a very important part of mysticism and understanding knowledge that comes from within and is confirmed from within and shared with people. And then that becomes a community level experience. And you can have a community level experience that is mystical. If you've ever had a song that a group of people are singing that transports you, if you've been to a concert, or you've just been in a group of people and all of a sudden there's dancing and people get swept up in the spirit in one way or the other. Those are mystical experiences that happen around us. If you go grow something in your garden and you go out in the next morning and all of a sudden there's a bloom or a blossom there, and it's this amazing experience. Like, where did that come from? You know where it came from, but at the same time you get that deeper insight of where did things come from. So I have found that in my practice of Stone Circle Wicca, that the simplest things can become the most profound things. And I want to talk a little bit about some of those. Stone Circle tradition of Wicca, it's a Wiccan mystery tradition. And we exist to promote the spiritual development of dedicants and initiates, people who study, to encourage responsible fulfillment of diverse Wiccan vocations, to be a priest, a priestess, or a priestess. And our reason for being is to serve communities that are in our environment and within the world, to all in Earth's households, and to the divine spirit of the universe. Now, we don't necessarily believe that there's just one way to believe or there's just one divinity, and we could never really settle that. So we use the phrase, we experience the eminence of divine as one and many, and we're not going to choose which it is. But we also have an experience, a human experience, where we experience the divine in other folks embodied as male, or in ourselves as embodied as male, as female, as all genders and beyond gender, so that there's more than just choosing boy, girl, like, and that marks us a bit different than other traditional Wiccan traditions. Now, when I say Wicca and I talk about traditions, Wicca in this form is really only has been on this religious scene since the 1950s. Uh, came around with the repeal of the witchcraft laws in England. But there are other people who have magical practices, other people who have mystical experiences, who have practices that are hereditary and have been brought down to them through the ages. You might know from the Italian community, you might have heard the word strega, that there's a tradition of witchcraft that comes from family lineage and passed down. There are also people who use the term witch that are solitary practitioners. That witch in the positive term means that you get knowledge and information from the things around you and from inside, and you're able to move with force to make things happen. You can garner your energies to make things manifest in your life. Let's go to the next slide. So we have 13 tools. They're very simple, very pragmatic. And the goal out of all of them is to focus on authenticity, integrity, compassion, and wisdom. And when we talk about a tool, this is I'll give you an example of all 13, that there's a simplistic tool, something you probably have in your kitchen drawer, you might have right at your fingertips right now as we speak. And each of those tools can remind us of a religious practice, or can be used in a ritual way that can offer magic. Magic meaning the ability to move energy and make things happen. So let's go to the next slide. So most of us have a cord of one kind or another. Some of you may have tied a string around your finger at some point to remember something, or you pull a thread of something and something happens. And that the cord for us at a deeper level, a mystical level, if you will, the mystical connection of a cord is representing our connections and our ties and our intentions. So having attention to intention. Sometimes you talk about feeling connected with someone. Each of us have had an umbilical cord and been tied to a mother at the beginning of our life. Our connections in the cord is just such a magical symbol that can have deeper levels of knowledge. So I'm wondering, as we go through this, if you'll just kind of think about maybe a cord that really means something to you, something that that is mystical and meaningful. Sometimes people will tie a knot in the end of a cord, and they'll use that cord and wind it around. And then at some point when they're done with their intention, they'll tie another knot in the cord. There are ritual practices that you can use just out of simple string and thread, all kinds of cords that we have. Most of us love a book in one way or another. It holds our memories, it holds our wisdom. This is speaking more about journaling and writing your truth. Remember the earlier words about authenticity, that sometimes in journaling, you find authentic truth. Sometimes you find an aha moment. Sometimes you find something awful and dreadful that, wow, that is making an impact on my soul. I see the reality of that situation. That's a mystical meaning that can come from a book, and a book that you write, and that we are responsible for writing the book of our life. If you will, maybe for just a second, would you tap on your heart for a moment? Remember as you tap that you have a beginning and an end, that as you tap on yourself, you have something inside, and if you look hard enough, you you might find a soul inside there. You have a soul in there somewhere, but as you tap and connect with yourself and remember that you're alive, you may realize that your soul is even larger than yourself. Drumming represents a pulse of life, but I've been taught by a drum mage who tells me that there's a rhythm of life. His name is Tigre, and he talks about the pulse of life moving through things, but also the silence between a drum beat, that you can have a beat and then you have another beat and you have another beat, and then you build anticipation for somebody being on beat or off beat, that there is an energy that's represented in drumming as well. So this is a mystical tool that maybe you can think about in terms of what you think about drums and what you feel about drums. Let's go to the next slide. Most of us have a blade, and in really bad B-rated movies, witches are shown with these knives, and they get a really bad rap. But you know, a blade, or in many Wiccan traditions, they call it an athame or an athame, and the blade represents division, creating boundaries, things that are cut away. At some point, you have to cut the umbilical cord after birth. At some point, you have to cut the apron strings for the people that you're parenting in life. And the blade is a good thing. Sometimes things get a bad rap, but sometimes you just need a good knife. You may also have an imbued memory. You may have a pocket knife from a grandfather. You might have a pocket knife from your grandmother or someone in your family that passes something down through. And the blade represents creating boundaries, cutting away things. In Wiccan groups, we often cast a circle. We start ritual by casting a circle, and we cut a space. We demark with a knife a sacred space, a sphere, cast a circle. Let's talk about the censer. Do most of you have incense or have had an experience with incense? We know some people have an experience with incense. Incense, for me, the most magical incense that transports me in a minute is copal. It's kind of like frankincense. It's a resin incense. Stick incense sometimes makes my nose itch, and it's very perfumey, and I'm not so much about that. But there's something about the censer of being aware of ourselves and our senses that are important in life. And sometimes just a smell, you know, waking up in the morning and smelling bacon, or somebody cooking brownies, or some of their favorite dish. You smell that and it just transports you. It's a mystical experience in that regard. The dish represents offerings and service to community. So we'll do rituals where we'll have a dish, we'll turn to our ancestors and make an offering to the ancestors and thank them. And then we turn around and bring back to community from the dish the knowledge that came from our ancestors for the group gathered. So sometimes a dish is just a dish, but sometimes it's a way to serve up sacred knowledge. Let's go to the next. So the cauldron, that's a really misunderstood and often, again, those bad B-rated movies, it's those, what you think about with a witch, you know, double, boiling trouble, all of those things. But I will offer to you, think about it this way. A cauldron is shaped, has a bowl shape, but it also has a kind of a lip around it. A cauldron is not a frying pan, and a cauldron is not a saucepan. A cauldron is not a griddle. A cauldron is rounded to allow energies to circulate. And whatever the pieces are that you put into it have a way of circulating and connecting and infusing the flavors together in that cauldron. The cauldron is also connected mystically in this class about mysticism as a place of the womb. And the cauldron is also connected with a place of the tomb. And so some of these very simple objects have such deeper meanings. And I hope that you're seeing the levels of mystical experiences that come in just everyday objects. Now, we've used a term in Yiddish called the shmata. And the shmata is like a rag, a cloth that may be multi-purpose. And for us, it represents an altar cloth that you might have, a cloth that you put around yourself. Sometimes when you pray, you cover yourself with a shmata, a piece of fabric, and it can be either opaque or transparent, and it helps you focus. And you, by the act of concealing, you can sometimes reveal knowledge as well. So think about fabrics that are important to you, tablecloths, table coverings, if you've ever been veiled at some point and what that might mean to you at a mystical level. The chalice, so raising a cup or a glass, one of my favorite things to do to bring community together, to celebrate personal connections. Hail to you, hail to my friends, hail to those around us. The chalice representing hospitality. Next slide. Now the bowl, not necessarily used for cooking like a cauldron, but the bowl representing the physical world and our place in it. You can think of a bowl as holding and a place to focus energy. It's also a way to have a bowl and to contain it, contain things within it, and then serve it to other people. Not necessarily service like a dish, but understanding the physical world that sometimes we need to cohere and contain ourselves and to be held in a certain way. So that's the bowl. The mirror, representing our self-image and our perception of others. There is a wonderful tale, and I won't tell you now, but have you ever heard the children's tale of the Snow Queen? And in the earlier versions of that fairy tale, there was an imp who created a magic mirror and loved to show people in the mirror that they looked ugly. And there's a whole tale about what happened. And what happened when that imp climbed up on a ladder and tried to show the moon that the moon was ugly, and something else happened there. So sometimes a mirror is just a mirror, but sometimes a mirror can represent a gateway into another world, or to see yourself reflected in a mystical way. I think most of us are familiar with a candle representing illumination, and it is one of the most universal symbols. And I love the UU chalice lighting that is a flame, a candle that represents illumination and divine spark in all things. Sometimes a candle is just a candle, but sometimes it is a light in the dark that brings people together. Sometimes a candle can start a great fire. So there's layers and layers of mystical meanings to all of these very simple things. And last is the wand. Having a wand and being able to reach out and connect and put something into action. My friends call me a pot stirrer, and that I stir the pot. And for me, a wand is the spoon that I use to stir things up and to get things started, sometimes to calm things down. I hope this is kind of an interesting trail through very simple everyday objects that you might have a mystical experience with. And at this point, I'd like to open up a conversation about simple moments when a simple object has brought you a magical or a mystical experience. Thank you for letting me go through 13 tools so quickly. Does anyone here have a cauldron that they use?
Trisha's raised her hand.
Okay, Trisha?
So when I was practicing therapy, this is about the cord.
Mm.
I had a ribbon. My therapy rooms all had keys. You needed to have a key to get into a therapy room. And in the clinic that I was working in, we would reserve various rooms. But anyway, the point is we each had a key that would open any of the doors. And I kept my key on a garnet colored satin ribbon.
Mm.
And during my therapy sessions, I would slowly stroke the satin ribbon. And it really helped me focus. And I liked thinking that I was imbuing, this is a little weird maybe, but I like to think that all of my positive energy and intentions for my clients was being somehow imbued in this ribbon through my stroking it during our sessions, really slowly stroking it. And I felt that it was more and more valuable the more I used it this way. And I've never talked about this to anyone before, but
Oh, interesting.
when you talked about the cord,
Uh-huh.
that's what it made me think of, is that it was, you talked about making multiple knots each time in the cord, which I did not do, but I just felt that stroking it was a significant and important thing somehow. And I think that the slow movement might have been relaxing to my clients and helped them open up. Like I said, I've never talked about this to anybody before, but I really did think of that ribbon as being a very sacred presence in the therapy rooms with my clients.
Do you still have that ribbon?
Yes. And I've always thought, okay, now I'm no longer practicing therapy. What should I do with that ribbon?
I think in your thinking and praying about it, meditating about it, things can be revealed in these mystical practices that we've talked about that Renée has shared with us. I'll tell you one quick story about a string that I've had for years. It's a red cord, and I tied a knot on both ends, and I would hold it, pinch it in one hand with one end, and pinch it in the other, and I would wind it around my fingers one way, and then wind it and unwind it, and wind it and unwind it. And the chant that I have that goes with it is, in this winding I am finding, in this hour love's strong power. In this winding I am finding, in this hour love's strong power. And I can get into a meditative mystical space just with a piece of string and a chant. It's an amazing, it's an awesome thing. It's those four words that Renée brought to us about being ineffable and noetic and transient and having some passivity. Other thoughts?
Would you say your chant again? In this
Oh, I'll put it
winding,
in.
I am finding.
In this hour, love's strong power. Anyone else have a thought or spark an interest from either something I've said or something that Renée has said or something you felt? Renée, you're muted.
I'm muted. I got a warning from my computer too. I was just gonna say it's interesting to me how it sounds like a lot the meaning we can put into the objects and then they give it back to us, that's coming from us, and we can use the tool or the object to that, and then it becomes meaningful from the meaning that we've given to it, and kind of that back and forth between the object and yourself.
There's a practice. And Renée, if you advance to the next slide, it's just kind of a neutral slide. We don't need to keep looking at number 10, 11, and 12. Okay. There is a study, like if I went back to school, I chose not to go for an MDiv. That was just too much. I chose not to go back to school for a number of different things. If I would go back, I wanted to study semiotics. Have you heard that term, semiotics? The practice of making meaning, and how does a thing get connected to a meaning, and how do they get associated? Semiotics is really a lot about ritual practices and mystical things. Sometimes it's just the touch of a hand, especially in the pandemic. There are people who are in a hospice situation and people can't visit them, and healthcare workers can't give them that symbol of a touch. And if they do, and when they're able to do that or connect eye gaze, to be able to have somebody transported and transcended, it's truly a mystical experience. I think we undersell our regular daily experiences, and we don't necessarily revere them and honor them as the mystical experiences they are. Wendy?
I was just gonna say, you might want to unshare the screen and then we can all see each other.
That would be great. Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome.
Should I run through and see what else is on
This
here?
is the last slide, so we're good.
Okay, just so you can see if we,
Mhm.
okay, forward this to you, then you'll have some of the sources from the class and link to the mantra paper, and then the more details about the
Right.
story in detail.
Right, and Ebony, I have a few other things to add as well. So we'll things that we've talked about here tonight are running through my head, and I'll put them in the bibliography. Let's see, gallery view is a really good thing to do.
Yeah, I just switched to gallery view myself.
Oh wow, there are people here. Hi.
We've got the Brady Bunch situation going on right now, I think.
You
the
know,
9.
I've got I've had some mystical experiences connected to things, and I keep them in my house, and they're just sort of around the house, and they mean something to me every time I'm in the room with that object or thing. So I would call that a bit of mysticism, and things that I hang on to that bring that special moment back to me.
Mhm.
So
I would say, I mean, it's a strange mystical experience. I guess you'd still call it that. Is I have, I like to cook, so I have cooking utensils from my parents, and when I use those, I always feel connected to ancestry. And the one time I made calzones for the first time, and my stone I was using didn't hold them all, so I was using a cookie sheet, and I took a picture of the calzones afterwards, and it was on the cookie sheet from my mom. And my sister saw it, and she said, I wasn't so much interested about the calzones, but that cookie sheet. Because it's a cookie sheet that it's an old-fashioned one, and there's a pattern on the base of it. So you can't miss it. I mean, you know that it's my mom's cookie sheet. You know, when you made cookies, the bottom of it had these like almost star patterns on it because it's these square of things. But to me, using things from, my parents in that way, and thinking of them as I use these items to cook as they did.
Talking about smells, I grew up north of Pittsburgh, and at New Year's, our tradition among German families was to have pork and sauerkraut at New Year's. Not collard greens and black-eyed peas. It was pork and sauerkraut.
We still do that.
And different people and friends when they come over for New Year's Eve, and they'll just walk in and go, God, this kitchen smells. And I'm like, oh, that smells like home to me. It has it's very funny how one thing can mean something to one person and mean something different to another person.
Actually, pork and sauerkraut in our family is a tradition that goes 4 or 5 generations. My grandmother, who was German, also made it. My parents always made it. I always made it. My daughter always makes it. So
Right?
That's a smell of New Year's Day. in our family.
Absolutely. So a piece of a story within that is that I think in terms of German cultures in America, we are at the tail end of some cultural extinction. The fact that my niece and her daughters, my great nieces, are never going to do pork and sauerkraut. They finally just said, we're not doing that, not in our house. And I found some people who study the old ways of German, the pre-Christian ways of German, and there's a practice called Erglawe, and I'll put it in the chat. Oh, Penny, take care. Good night. That there are the old ways in the Amish hex signs that are a part of it looks like brucheria, Brucherie, brujeria, and hex signs. Like, why the heck do they use the word hex? And there's a practice called Erglawe, Urglaawe, which is the old ways of Germany. And that there is wisdom and knowledge in planting by the signs. There's wisdom and knowledge by knowing your place in the universe and living and let living, and some of those things that are a part of that as American culture has moved on, and all of the racism and white supremacy and all of the things that are just a part of this American experience, we're also losing the good things about parts of culture too. And it's complex and it's worth studying. But yeah, I just know in my family, they're like, yeah, pork and sauerkraut. I'm like, why? Why are we so incessantly interested in that? You have a bit of culture when it becomes a thing. It's a mystical experience. It's a touchstone for something very important in your life. You probably have stories like that in your own family, and hope that this is going to help you think about those things, the mystical in the mundane world.
So 3 of us at least have this German heritage, and the pork and sauerkraut is sort of a sacred thing to us.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel really strongly about it. And it's not just a New Year's Day thing or a New Year's Eve thing. It just all the, I don't know, it's just really special for some reason. And I know that when I prepare and or eat pork and sauerkraut, I just really feel like I'm connecting with my ancestors in a really positive way. And I could also really relate, Wendy, to what you were saying about the different cooking implements. The rolling pin I have is, according to my mother, it was my father's mother's rolling pin. And I think about that, even my father loved to roll dough out and make turnovers and stuff like that. And, these rituals of preparing things the way we know some of our ancestors did is a nice way of sort of connecting. And it feels kind of spiritual in a way. It feels like evoking the spirit of the ancestors somehow.
Trisha, as you spoke about that, and I'll bet all of us have a memory of a rolling pin from your family. Which of the 13 tools might a rolling pin be? Because it's not a dish. And it's
I'm
not a
thinking
cauldron.
about the wand. Yeah, the thing that you reach out with to make things happen. That's what I think of.
That's what I'm thinking. I
That's
never
what I'm
thought of it in
thinking
these
too.
terms. It's like, oh, a rolling pin does make change.
Yeah.
It is something that reaches out, and sometimes it beans you on the head.
Thank goodness that never happened.
Only if
For me,
somebody's really
anyway.
mad at you.
So it's like a wand. It brings about change.
In my house, when I get the rolling pin out and it makes a particular noise, I have a puppy who likes the Pido, and he will come running.
Pavlovian response. That your dog has associated a meaning, a semiotic meaning to that thing.
Yes.
It's probably a mystical experience for the dog when they get a treat. Renee, I'm wondering, I was thinking and imagining that you had kind of a magical experience, even going back through your books and your courses and things like that to even consider this topic.
Where am I? I did connect. So I don't know if this was before or after this class. I think it was before this class. Yeah, it was before this class, I think. But maybe it did. I connected with it because I thought back on this one experience, and I feel like I felt when other people have shared, where you kind of almost like embarrassed to share because you're like, it sounds crazy, or it sounds silly, but I know it felt this way, and you just don't think that. You just don't believe that the person's possibly gonna believe the feeling that you had exactly. It's just a simple thing that I was like at the beach, and I felt like I should lay flat on the sand like this, and like lay completely against the sand like that. And again, this is like Trisha, like I haven't talked about this because I just feel like it sounds silly or something, but I just had this feeling that like I felt when I closed my eyes, and the sensation that I had felt so much like I was across the whole world, like I was part of it, and it just sort of just felt like it disappeared and didn't feel myself as much. It's just this sort of feeling that I had, but that was very overwhelming and I couldn't really describe it. But that's what when I took this class and I thought back to that, it's like I think maybe I experienced that oneness feeling with that, and I've have feelings less intense sometimes with other experience like nature experiences, but that's been the one thing that stuck with me of where I thought that I felt at one with like something greater than myself in the moment, and it always stuck with me.
So Renee, I feel that way about floating in the ocean. And I like to float out just the same way you described, completely stretched out, just floating in the ocean. And I feel like when I do that, I'm connecting with all of the earth, because most of the earth is water and the sky is above me. And I just feel that it's a way of communing with all that is. I feel really strongly about that.
I guess it's not that silly because I mean we are part of the rest of the universe, so it's a truth that's just observing that we're part of the rest of the universe and we're the same, made of the same stuff, but there's lots of distractions in everyday life where you're not feeling that all the time. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I think it's, I've been doing some like deeper research into shamanism, and it is like the most ancient, it's prehistoric shamanism, prehistoric spiritual practice. And I see a lot of mysticism and shamanism in terms of, in shamanism, the primacy of that altered state of consciousness is really essential to the practice. And what strikes me is how embodying it is. It's a feeling. And a lot of times practicing spirituality, we're saying something but the embodiment of it, and that the lack of ability to describe it, it's just a feel, it's a deep feeling, I think is really, it puts us at the same level as other living beings. You don't need words. We're just one. And when you have that instance of that feeling of connectedness, the words don't matter because we're all feeling the same. We can't communicate verbally, but we can feel that whatever that is, that's beautiful. So I think that's really, really interesting. And another thing about shamanism that I think connects to this is how everything has a spirit, has an essence, whether it's a tree, a rock, a leaf. And we talked about how we felt the sacred in objects and how that connected to us inside. And so it just connects with, I think it's animism. The animism is when objects have that essence, something like that, I believe. I'm still learning, but I just see the connections. And then I like how you all, Renee and Eldritch, you talked about how there's that mysticism in other faiths, you know, and so other faith traditions have lifted up the relevancy of this embodiment of experience. And that also strikes me as something holy.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate this class because it's sort of bringing together for me so many sacred thoughts that, and even objects that I use in my life that are like subliminally sacred to me. You know, like I'm thinking about the different reference books that I use that are like I don't know if if anybody else has these, but I have uh, books that talk about the meaning of different animals that we see, and I have a lot of animals in my yard, and I mean everything, all kinds of animals and creatures that I see are, you know, Eric and I just delight in seeing these different things. And it's this idea that a certain creature appears to you in your path and it has like a message for you, you know, and you sort of contemplate what the characteristics are of that particular creature and what they do, what time of year they are fertile. You know, they're just like all kinds of potential symbolisms, and meditating on those connections, those specific things, characteristics of these different creatures, sometimes it like really has a message for what's going on in your life. Can I tell a little story about a really strange experience I had like that? I was in graduate school and I had this one professor who was just a really ornery, difficult person. And I can't remember the specific thing that was happening at the time, but my daughter and I were eating breakfast and a squirrel appeared on our deck looking straight at us through the kitchen window. And so, you know, we both noticed it, and the squirrel just stayed there staring at us as though it was trying to tell us something important. So I said, well, you know, I'm going to go get my animal book and see what the message is of a squirrel. So I opened up my book, and immediately the page that I opened to was not the squirrel, but it was the picture of a snow leopard. And in reality, I had never even heard of a snow leopard. But when I saw that picture, I said, oh, this was what was in my dream last night. And I read the message of the snow leopard, and it was exactly relevant to this issue with this nasty professor. It was like absolutely uncanny. And it was as though, I mean, this is a stretch maybe, but it was as though the squirrel was saying, look in your animal book. And when I opened it, I realized this whole dream came back to me about this snow leopard, which I didn't even realize there was a leopard that was a snow leopard. I actually never heard snow and leopard put together, but it appeared in my dream, even though I had no recollection of ever having seen one in a zoo or anything until I opened this book and saw the picture. But it was just like so uncanny because it was very idiosyncratically speaking to the specific situation with this ornery professor.
I put the homework in the chat there. You might, if you like this topic, do your own bit of research, or maybe we could come back together. Mystical knowledge, maybe do a bit of research on the word symbol, omen, portent, or a sign, not sign, but a sign.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen as we end for today.
Sure.
We will extinguish our chalice.
Ebony, before we extinguish the chalice, could you hold up the chalice and us listen to a song and maybe have a mystical experience together? This song came from a group of shamanic practitioners, people who believe in mystical experiences, written in the moment by someone we know, Mary Turtle Rooker, and her group. And I'll share the link in our bibliography as well. So if you would, let's take a moment, and this is just a short, probably like a 3-minute song. It looks like we have time enough for that.
We did.
Good, maybe even less than that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's take a breath in.
We are all connected. When one shines, we all shine. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. When one laughs, we all laugh. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. When one heals, we all heal. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. We are one. We are all connected. We are one. We are one. We are one.
Amen. We extinguish this chalice.
You unmute.
Oh, I am unmuted. Can you hear me? Okay, great. We extinguish this chalice.
Still can you? Not yet.
Eldritch,
hear
that
me?
must be on your end because I can hear.
Okay. We extinguish this chalice in honor of the mystical experience, our direct experience of ultimate reality. Okay. So thank you for joining us in this class today. We have one more class for the summer. August 14th, Nurturing a Healthy Spirituality, Creating Spiritual Wholeness. I'm actually teaching that class, and what I'll be sharing is something that I learned in a class that I participated in at Meadville Lombard Seminary, a Unitarian Universalist seminary. So I learned some interesting things, and we'll be sharing them, and hope that you'll join me for that. 10 a.m. August 14th. The program for the fall has not been put together yet. So if you have any topics you'd like to see, if you know any instructors that you'd like to hear, please do reach out to me and let me know. I'd love to have them share with us.
Thank you all.
All right. Thank you.
Hey,
Thank
Have
you.
a good
thank
night.
you.
Thank
Great.
you, Eldritch and Renee.
Oh, sure. It's great.
Thanks, everybody.
Yes, yes, it was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Ebony, I loved
appreciate
your
it.
chalice lighting and extinguishing those. They were really cool.
Thanks, everybody.
Please email me if you'd like the materials, because for registration, not everyone registered, which is fine, but my email is in the chat if you'd like to get the slides or anything like that. So, okay, thank you.
Okay.
Stop the recording. And
Good
I'd
night.
like to,
Ebony, if we registered,